She arrived at the academy every evening at exactly 6:30, just as the last students were packing up their instruments and heading home. Nobody greeted her. Nobody looked her way. She was simply the woman who cleaned up after them. And that was enough for most people to pretend she did not exist. Her name was Elena, and she had worked as a janitor at the Westbrook Conservatory of Music for 7 years. 7 years of mopping the same marble floors. 7 years of emptying the same trash bins filled with crumpled sheet music and empty coffee cups. 7 years of watching young, talented musicians walk past her like she was just another piece of furniture. The conservatory was one of the most respected music schools in the country. Students came from wealthy families, paid enormous tuition fees, and dreamed of performing in the greatest concert halls in the world. They wore expensive clothes, carried instruments that cost more than Elena made in a year, and spoke about their futures with the kind of confidence that only comes from never having to worry about money. Elena pushed her cleaning cart through the long hallway, the wheels squeaking softly against the polished floor. She passed practice rooms where students had left behind water bottles and forgotten scarves. She collected them quietly, placing them in the lost and found bin that nobody ever checked. Tonight, like every night, she saved the main recital hall for last. The recital hall was the heart of the conservatory. It had 300 velvet seats arranged in a gentle curve, tall windows that let in the moonlight, and perfect acoustics that made even a whisper sound beautiful. But the thing that drew Elena to this room, the thing that made her heart ache every single time, was the piano. It sat alone on the stage, a 9-foot Steinway grand piano with a finish so black and glossy that it reflected the ceiling lights like a mirror. It was worth more than most houses. The conservatory treated it like a sacred object, and only the most advanced students were allowed to play it during performances. Elena stood at the edge of the stage, mop in hand, just looking at it. She had a routine. First, she would sweep the stage. Then she would dust the piano bench. Then she would take a soft cloth and carefully, almost lovingly, wipe down the piano itself. She cleaned it more gently than anything else in the building. The other janitors thought she was just being thorough. They did not know the truth. The truth was that Elena had once been a pianist herself, not just any pianist. She had been a prodigy. Back in the Philippines, where she grew up, she had started playing at the age of 4. By 6, she was performing at local concerts. By 10, she had earned a full scholarship to the Manila Conservatory of Music, one of the best music schools in Southeast Asia. Her teachers said she had a gift that came along once in a generation. Her father, a factory worker who earned very little, would cry every time he watched her perform. He said her music made him forget all the hard things in his life. Elena practiced 8 hours a day. She learned Bach, Beethoven, Chopin, Liszt. She dreamed of studying in Europe, of playing at Carnegie Hall, of making her family proud on the biggest stages in the world. And then, when she was 17, everything fell apart. Her father got sick. The medical bills piled up faster than anyone could pay. Her mother, who worked as a house cleaner, took on extra jobs, but it was never enough. Elena had to make a choice. She could keep chasing her dream, or she could help her family survive. She chose her family. She dropped out of the conservatory and took a job at a garment factory. She worked 12-hour shifts, stitching clothes that would be shipped to other countries. Her fingers, which had once danced across piano keys, now pushed fabric through sewing machines until they bled. At night, she would come home and find her father asleep, his breathing shallow and labored, and she would sit beside his bed and hum the melodies she used to play. He died 2 years later. He never got to see her perform again. After that, Elena felt like the music inside her had died too. She could not bring herself to touch a piano. Every time she saw one, she thought of her father's face in the audience, his eyes wet with tears, his rough hands clapping harder than anyone else's. The memories were too painful, so she buried them deep and tried to move on. She immigrated to America in her late 20s, following an aunt who had settled there years earlier. She took whatever work she could find. She cleaned offices, washed dishes at restaurants, and eventually got the job at Westbrook Conservatory. The irony was not lost on her. She had spent her childhood dreaming of attending a school like this, and now she was mopping its floors. But there was something about being here that she could not let go of. Maybe it was the sound of music drifting through the hallways. Maybe it was the sight of young students rushing to their lessons with excitement in their eyes. Maybe it was just the piano, that beautiful black Steinway that seemed to call to her every night. After she finished cleaning, when the building was completely empty and the lights were dimmed, Elena would do something she had never told anyone about. She would sit down at the piano. She never played. She was too afraid. 20 years had passed since she last touched the keys, and she was terrified of what she might find. What if her fingers had forgotten everything? What if the music was truly gone? She did not think she could bear that kind of loss again, so instead, she just sat there. She rested her hands on the keys without pressing them. She closed her eyes and remembered. She remembered her father's smile. She remembered the smell of the practice room at her old conservatory. She remembered the feeling of the music flowing through her, like electricity, like magic, like something bigger than herself. Sometimes she sat there for 5 minutes. Sometimes she sat there for an hour, and when she finally stood up, she would wipe down the keys one more time, as if apologizing for bothering them, and then she would finish her shift and go home to her small apartment. Nobody knew. Nobody suspected. To everyone at Westbrook, she was just the quiet cleaning lady who kept to herself. She was invisible, forgettable, unimportant. The students rushed past her without a second glance. The professors nodded politely but never learned her name. She had become exactly what she looked like. A middle-aged woman in a gray uniform, pushing a mop, going nowhere. But sometimes, late at night, when Elena sat alone on that piano bench with her eyes closed, she could almost hear the music again, faint and far away, like a song playing in another room, like a ghost that refused to leave. She did not know that everything was about to change. She did not know that in just a few days, a moment of cruelty would unlock something she had buried for 2 decades. She did not know that the whole world was about to hear her story. All she knew, on this quiet Tuesday evening, was that the piano was waiting. And so was she. The spring showcase was the biggest event of the year at Westbrook Conservatory. For weeks, the entire building buzzed with nervous energy. Students practiced until their fingers cramped. Teachers pushed their pupils harder than ever. Posters announcing the showcase hung on every wall, and parents had already started booking hotels from across the country to watch their children perform. Elena noticed the change in atmosphere right away. The trash bins were fuller than usual, stuffed with drafts of sheet music that students had scribbled on and thrown away in frustration. The practice room stayed occupied until late at night, and the recital hall, her favorite place in the building, was constantly being used for rehearsals. This made her job harder. She had to wait longer before she could clean. And by the time the hall was finally empty, she was exhausted. But she did not complain. She never complained. She just did her work quietly and tried to stay out of everyone's way. It was a Thursday afternoon, about a week before the showcase, when everything changed. Elena had come in earlier than usual because one of the other janitors had called in sick. She was supposed to clean the East Wing classrooms, but she needed a new mop head from the supply closet near the recital hall. She walked through the back corridor, pushing her cart as quietly as possible, trying not to disturb anyone. The doors to the recital hall were propped open. Inside, a group of senior students were taking a break from rehearsal. There were about 8 of them, sitting on the edge of the stage, laughing and talking loudly. Their instruments lay beside them, forgotten for the moment. A few professors had stepped out, probably to get coffee, leaving the students unsupervised. Elena kept her head down and pushed her cart past the doorway. She just needed to get to the supply closet. She did not want any trouble. But one of the students noticed her. He was a tall young man with slicked back hair and an expensive watch on his wrist. He was the kind of person who walked through life knowing that doors would always open for him. His father was a major donor to the conservatory, and everyone knew it. He treated the school like it belonged to him. "Hey," he called out, his voice echoing through the hall. "Cleaning lady, you missed a spot." His friends laughed. Elena did not look up. She kept walking. "I'm talking to you," the young man said, louder this time. He hopped off the stage and walked toward her, a smirk spreading across his face. "What's the rush? Got somewhere important to be?" Elena stopped. She had learned a long time ago that ignoring people like this only made things worse. So she turned around and faced him, her expression calm and neutral. "I'm just getting supplies," she said quietly. "I'll be out of your way." The young man tilted his head, looking at her like she was some kind of curiosity. "You know, I've seen you around here for years. Always cleaning. Always quiet. Don't you ever get bored?" "It's my job," Elena said. "Right. Right. Your job." He glanced back at his friends, who were watching with amusement. "But don't you ever wish you could do something more? Something that actually matters?" Elena felt a small sting in her chest, but she kept her face still. "My work matters," she said. The young man laughed. It was not a cruel laugh. Not yet. But it had an edge to it. "I mean, sure. Someone's got to mop the floors, I guess. But doesn't it feel weird, being surrounded by all this music, all this talent, and you're just cleaning up after us?" Elena said nothing. She had heard comments like this before. Rich students who thought their money made them better than everyone else. She had learned to let it roll off her back. But today, the young man was in a playful mood. And playful, for someone like him, usually meant finding entertainment at someone else's expense. "Hey, I have an idea," he said, turning back to his friends. "What do you guys think? Should we let the cleaning lady try the piano?" The group burst into laughter. A girl with perfectly styled hair nearly choked on her bottled water. Another student clapped his hands in delight. "Oh, come on," the young man continued, clearly enjoying the attention. "It would be hilarious. I bet she's never even touched a piano before. Probably doesn't even know what the pedals are for." "Dude, stop," one of his friends said, though he was laughing too. "That's mean." "It's not mean. It's funny. Besides, I'm being generous here. Most people would kill for a chance to play on that Steinway." He turned back to Elena, his eyes glittering with mischief. "What do you say, cleaning lady? Want to give it a try? I'll even give you $100 if you can play anything, even just one little song." Elena's heart was pounding now. She could feel the blood rushing to her face. Part of her wanted to walk away, to escape this humiliation and pretend it never happened. But another part of her, a part she had buried long ago, was stirring. "I should get back to work," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, come on, don't be shy." The young man grabbed a chair and dragged it next to the piano bench, as if he were setting up a show. "We could all use a good laugh. Right, guys?" His friends cheered and whistled. A few of them pulled out their phones, ready to record whatever embarrassing thing was about to happen. Elena stood frozen. She looked at the piano. That beautiful, perfect Steinway. The same piano she had been secretly sitting at for 7 years, never daring to press a single key. The same piano that reminded her of everything she had lost. And now these children were mocking her. They saw her gray uniform and her calloused hands and assumed she was nothing. They thought she was just some uneducated woman who had never known beauty, or art, or music. They had no idea who she used to be. They had no idea what she had sacrificed. Something shifted inside her. It was small at first, like a crack forming in a frozen lake. But she could feel it spreading, growing, breaking apart the walls she had built around her heart for 2 decades. She thought of her father. She thought of his face in the audience, beaming with pride. She thought of his rough hands clapping, his voice shouting her name. She thought of the promise she had made to him when she was just a little girl, that one day she would play on the biggest stages in the world. She had broken that promise. Life had gotten in the way. But maybe, just maybe, there was still a tiny piece of that girl left inside her. The young man was still talking, making jokes, basking in the laughter of his friends. He did not notice that Elena had stopped looking at the floor. He did not notice that her hands had stopped trembling. He did not notice that something had changed in her eyes. Neither did anyone else in the room, except for one person. Professor Huang stood in the doorway at the back of the hall. She was the head of the piano department, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had come back from her coffee break just in time to witness the entire scene. She watched silently, her expression unreadable. As the students continued their mockery, she did not intervene. She did not say a word. She simply waited, curious to see what would happen next. And then, without a word, Elena set down her cleaning cloth. She took a breath, and she began to walk toward the stage. The laughter slowly died down as the students realized she was actually approaching the piano. The young man raised his eyebrows, surprised but delighted. This was even better than he had hoped. "No way," he said, grinning. "She's actually going to do it." Elena climbed the 3 steps to the stage. Her worn sneakers made no sound against the polished wood. She walked past the young man without looking at him. She walked past his smirking friends. She walked all the way to the piano and stopped in front of the bench. For a long moment, she just stood there. The room had gone quiet now. Even the students who had been laughing seemed to sense that something was different. There was a tension in the air, thick and electric. Like the moment before a storm, Elena sat down on the bench. She placed her hands on her lap. She stared at the keys in front of her. 88 of them, black and white, waiting. 20 years. It had been 20 years since she had played. She closed her eyes. She took one more breath, and then, slowly, she lifted her hands. The recital hall was silent. Not the comfortable silence of an empty room, but the tense, expectant silence of people waiting for something to happen. The students on the stage had stopped laughing. They were watching Elena now, some with smirks still frozen on their faces, others with confused expressions, unsure what to make of this strange turn of events. Elena sat perfectly still on the piano bench. Her hands rested on her lap, fingers slightly curled, the way they had been trained to rest so many years ago. She could feel everyone's eyes on her. She could hear someone whisper something and another person stifle a giggle. They were waiting for her to embarrass herself. They were waiting for the joke to play out. But Elena was not thinking about them anymore. She was thinking about the last time she had sat at a piano like this. She was 17 years old, wearing a simple white dress her mother had sewn by hand. The auditorium at the Manila Conservatory was packed with people. Her father sat in the front row, his factory uniform hidden under a borrowed blazer that was too big for him. He had taken the day off work, losing a full day's wages, just to watch her perform. She had played Chopin that night, Ballade No. 1-inch G minor. It was one of the most difficult pieces in the classical repertoire, nearly 10 minutes of complex emotion and technical brilliance. Her teachers had told her she was too young to attempt it. She had proven them wrong. When she finished, the audience had risen to their feet. Her father was crying. It was the proudest moment of her life. And then, 3 months later, everything fell apart. Elena opened her eyes. The memory faded, but the feeling remained. That fire that used to burn inside her, the one she thought had died long ago, was flickering back to life. She looked down at the keys. They gleamed under the stage lights, perfect and waiting. She had not touched a piano in 20 years. 20 years of silence. 20 years of pretending that part of her no longer existed. What if she had forgotten everything? What if her fingers no longer remembered how to move? What if she pressed the keys and nothing came out but clumsy, broken noise? The fear was overwhelming. It wrapped around her chest like a tight band, making it hard to breathe. Every instinct told her to stand up, apologize, and walk away. Go back to her mop and her cart and her invisible life. It was safer that way, less painful. But then she heard the young man's voice behind her. "Well, we're waiting, cleaning lady. Show us what you've got." More snickers from his friends. Someone made a comment about recording this for social media. Another person said something about going viral. Elena's jaw tightened. She thought about all the years she had spent being invisible. All the times people had looked right through her, treating her like she was nothing. All the dreams she had buried because life had been too hard and too unfair. She thought about her father, who had worked his fingers to the bone so she could have piano lessons. Who had believed in her more than anyone else in the world. Who had died before she could keep her promise to him. No, she was not going to walk away. Not this time. Elena lifted her hands and placed them gently on the keys. The ivory felt cool and smooth beneath her fingertips. Familiar. Like coming home after a very long journey. She took a slow breath. She closed her eyes again. And then, before she could talk herself out of it, she began to play. The first note rang out through the hall, clear and pure. It hung in the air for a moment, suspended, before fading into silence. Then came the second note. And the third, the opening of Chopin's Ballade, No One. Elena's fingers moved hesitantly at first, unsure of themselves. It had been so long. The muscle memory was buried deep, covered by layers of time and neglect. She stumbled slightly on a transition, hitting a wrong note that made her wince. Behind her, she heard a soft laugh. Someone whispered, "See? I told you." But Elena did not stop. She kept playing, pushing through the rust and the fear. And slowly, something miraculous began to happen. Her fingers started to remember. It was like watching ice melt in the spring. The stiffness faded. The hesitation disappeared. Note by note, measure by measure, the music began to flow more smoothly. What had started as a stumbling attempt transformed into something real, something beautiful. The laughter behind her stopped. Elena did not notice. She was no longer in the recital hall at Westbrook Conservatory. She was somewhere else entirely. She was back in Manila, sitting at the old upright piano in her family's tiny apartment. She was 8 years old, practicing scales while her mother cooked dinner in the kitchen. She was 12, performing at her first real concert, her knees shaking with nerves. She was 17, playing for her father one last time before everything changed. The music poured out of her like water from a broken dam. 20 years of suppressed emotion, 20 years of grief and longing and silent regret. All of it flowed through her fingers and into the keys. The ballade built in intensity, its melodies weaving together in complex patterns of joy and sorrow. Elena played with her whole body, swaying slightly with the rhythm. Her eyes still closed, tears beginning to stream down her cheeks. She did not try to stop them. She did not care anymore. The students on the stage had gone completely quiet. The young man who had mocked her stood frozen, his smirk long gone, replaced by an expression of utter disbelief. His friends had lowered their phones. Nobody was recording anymore. They were just watching, unable to look away. In the doorway, Professor Huang had not moved. But her eyes had changed. The curiosity had been replaced by something else. Recognition. Understanding. She knew exactly what she was witnessing. Elena reached the middle section of the ballade, where the music becomes tender and delicate, like a whispered confession. Her fingers danced lightly over the keys, producing notes so soft and sweet that they seemed to float in the air. A girl in the group of students put her hand over her mouth. A boy who had been laughing earlier looked down at the floor, his face red with shame. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The only sound in the entire hall was the piano, singing a song that had been locked away for 2 decades. Elena felt something breaking open inside her chest. It was painful and wonderful at the same time. All the walls she had built, all the armor she had worn to protect herself from the memories, it was all crumbling away. She was exposed now, vulnerable, raw, but she was also free. For the first time in 20 years, she was playing again. And it felt like coming back to life. The ballade moved into its final section, building toward its powerful climax. The notes came faster now, more urgent, more intense. Elena's hands flew across the keyboard with a skill that seemed impossible for someone who had not practiced in so long. But the truth was, some things cannot be forgotten. Some things are written so deep into your bones that they become part of who you are. Music was part of who Elena was. It always had been. She had just been too afraid to admit it. As she approached the final measures, Elena opened her eyes for the first time since she had started playing. Through her tears, the world looked blurred and dreamlike. She could see the students staring at her. She could see Professor Huang standing in the doorway. She could see the empty seats of the recital hall stretching out before her. But in her mind, she saw something else. She saw her father, sitting in the front row, wearing that borrowed blazer. He was smiling at her, his eyes wet with tears. His rough hands clasped together in his lap. He was nodding, slowly, proudly, the way he always did when she played. Elena smiled back at him through her tears, and then she played the final chord. It rang out through the hall, powerful and resonant, filling every corner of the room with its sound. Elena held the keys down, letting the notes sustain, letting them fade slowly into silence. And then there was nothing, just stillness, just the echo of what had just happened. Elena sat motionless on the bench, her hands still resting on the keys, her chest heaving with emotion. She did not know how long she had been playing. She did not know if it had been good or terrible. She only knew that she had done it. After 20 years of silence, she had finally played again. The room remained completely silent. Nobody clapped. Nobody spoke. It was as if everyone had forgotten how to breathe. And then, from the back of the hall, a single sound broke the stillness. It was the sound of someone clapping, slow, steady, deliberate. Elena looked up, blinking through her tears, trying to see who it was. Professor Huang was walking down the aisle toward the stage, her hands coming together in a rhythm that echoed through the empty hall. Her face was calm, but her eyes were shining. One by one, the students began to join in. First hesitantly, then with more conviction. The girl who had covered her mouth. The boy who had looked ashamed. Even the friends of the young man who had started all of this. The young man himself stood frozen, his face pale, his arrogance completely gone. He looked at Elena like he was seeing her for the first time. Like he was realizing, perhaps for the first time in his life, that he had made a terrible mistake. The applause grew louder. It filled the recital hall, bouncing off the walls, surrounding Elena like a wave, but she barely heard it. She was still looking at the empty seat in the front row, the seat where her father used to sit, and somewhere deep in her heart, she knew that he had heard her. After all these years, he had finally heard her play again. The applause continued for what felt like forever. Elena remained seated at the piano, her hands trembling in her lap, unable to fully process what had just happened. The tears had stopped falling, but her cheeks were still wet, and her heart was beating so hard, she could feel it in her throat. Professor Huang reached the edge of the stage and stopped. She did not climb the steps. She simply stood there, looking up at Elena with an expression that was impossible to read. The applause gradually faded as the students noticed her presence. One by one, they fell silent, waiting to see what would happen next. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Professor Huang said, in a voice that was quiet but carried through the entire hall, "What is your name?" Elena swallowed hard. Her voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. "Elena Reyes." The professor nodded slowly. "Elena Reyes. Where did you study?" "Manila Conservatory of Music. A long time ago." A murmur rippled through the students. The young man who had mocked her earlier shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between Elena and the professor. Professor Huang tilted her head slightly. "Who was your teacher?" Elena felt a fresh wave of emotion rise in her chest. "Madame Lucinda Santos." The professor's eyebrows lifted almost imperceptibly. Anyone who knew anything about classical piano in Asia knew that name. Madame Santos had been one of the most respected piano instructors in the Philippines, famous for producing world-class musicians. She had passed away several years ago, but her legacy remained. "I see," Professor Huang said softly. There was something new in her voice now. "Respect. That was Chopin's Ballade. No one. You played it from memory." After how many years without practice? Elena looked down at her hands. They were the hands of a cleaning woman. Rough skin, short nails, small calluses from years of mopping and scrubbing. But they had just played one of the most difficult pieces in the classical repertoire. 20 years, she said. The hall went completely silent again. 20 years. The number hung in the air like a ghost. Even the students who knew nothing about music understood what that meant. To play like that after 2 decades of not touching a piano was not just impressive, it was almost impossible. Professor Huang studied Elena for a long moment. Then, without another word, she turned and walked back up the aisle toward the exit. At the door, she paused and looked over her shoulder. "Come to my office tomorrow morning," she said. 9 o'clock, and then she was gone. Elena sat frozen on the bench, unsure what had just happened. The students around her began whispering to each other, their voices a confused buzz of shock and disbelief. Some of them were looking at her differently now. The contempt and amusement had been replaced by something else. Curiosity, wonder, maybe even a little fear. The young man who had started everything stood apart from his friends, his face pale and tight. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. For once in his life, he had no clever remarks. No jokes. No put-downs. He just stood there, looking lost. Elena slowly rose from the bench. Her legs felt weak and unsteady, like she had just run a marathon. She walked across the stage, down the steps, and back toward her cleaning cart. Nobody tried to stop her. Nobody said a word. She picked up her mop and pushed her cart out of the recital hall, leaving behind a room full of stunned silence. That night, Elena could not sleep. She lay in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling, replaying the evening over and over in her mind. Had it really happened? Had she really sat down at that piano and played Chopin in front of all those people? It felt like a dream, a strange, impossible dream. She thought about Professor Huang's invitation. 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. What did she want? Was Elena in trouble? Had she violated some rule by touching the piano? Maybe they were going to fire her. Maybe playing that Steinway without permission was a serious offense. But deep down, Elena knew that was not it. She had seen the look in the professor's eyes. That was not the look of someone who was angry. That was the look of someone who had witnessed something extraordinary. Elena closed her eyes and tried to quiet her racing thoughts. Whatever happened tomorrow, she could not change it now. She would just have to wait and see. What she did not know was that while she lay awake in her apartment, something was happening on the other side of the city. One of the students in the recital hall had recorded her performance. Not the young man who had mocked her. Someone else, a quiet girl who had been standing near the back, filming on her phone without anyone noticing. She had captured almost the entire thing, from the moment Elena sat down at the piano, to the final chord. That night, she uploaded the video to social media with a simple caption. "Janitor at my music school just did this. I'm shaking." By midnight, the video had 10,000 views. By 6 in the morning, it had crossed 1 million. Elena woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing. She almost never got calls or messages, so the noise startled her. She grabbed the phone from her nightstand and squinted at the screen. There were dozens of notifications, missed calls from numbers she did not recognize. Text messages from her cousin asking what was going on. Emails from addresses she had never seen before. Confused and a little frightened, Elena opened her social media app. She almost never used it, just kept it to stay connected with family back in the Philippines. But now, her notifications were exploding. She found the video within seconds. It had been shared thousands of times. The comments section was flooded with messages from strangers. "Who is this woman? This is incredible. I'm literally crying right now. She plays better than half the students at my conservatory. 20 years without practice? That's insane. Someone get this woman a concert hall." Elena stared at the screen, her hands shaking. This could not be real. This had to be some kind of mistake. But it was not a mistake. The video was real. And it was spreading like wildfire. By the time Elena arrived at the conservatory that morning, there were news vans parked outside. Reporters with cameras and microphones were gathered near the entrance, talking to students and staff. Elena slipped in through a side door, her heart pounding with anxiety. She had no idea what was happening, and the attention terrified her. She made her way to Professor Huang's office, avoiding the main hallways as much as possible. When she knocked on the door, a calm voice from inside said, "Come in." The office was small but elegant, filled with books and framed photographs of famous pianists. Professor Huang sat behind a wooden desk, her hands folded in front of her. She gestured for Elena to sit. "I assume you've seen the video," the professor said. Elena nodded, unable to find her voice. "It has over 5 million views now. By tonight, it will probably be 10 times that." Professor Huang paused, studying Elena's face. "You're going to be getting a lot of attention, Miss Reyes. Interview requests, media coverage, perhaps even offers from concert venues. Are you prepared for that?" Elena shook her head. "No, I don't. I never wanted any of this. I just wanted to." She trailed off, not sure how to finish the sentence. "You just wanted to play," the professor said gently. Elena looked up, surprised by the warmth in her voice. "Yes, I just wanted to play." Professor Huang was silent for a moment. Then she leaned back in her chair and said something that Elena would remember for the rest of her life. "I've been teaching piano for over 40 years. I've worked with prodigies and professionals. I've seen students win international competitions. And I can tell you, without any doubt, that what I witnessed yesterday was one of the most remarkable performances I have ever seen." She paused. "Not because it was technically perfect. It wasn't. You were rusty, and there were mistakes. But the emotion, the depth, the soul in your playing, that cannot be taught. You either have it, or you don't. And you, Miss Reyes, have it." Elena felt tears welling up in her eyes again. She had not cried this much in years. "I want to make you an offer," Professor Huang continued. "Westbrook has a program for exceptional adult students. It's rarely used, but it exists. I would like to offer you a full scholarship to complete your music education here. Not as a janitor, as a student." Elena's breath caught in her throat. She could not speak, she could not move. "You don't have to answer now," the professor said. "Take some time. Think about it. But I want you to know that what happened yesterday was not an accident. It was not luck. It was 20 years of love and loss and longing, all poured into a single performance. The world deserves to hear more of that. And more importantly, you deserve to play again." Elena sat in the chair, tears streaming down her face, completely overwhelmed. A scholarship. A second chance. The chance to become what she was always meant to be. It seemed impossible. It seemed like a fairy tale. But as she looked at Professor Huang's kind, serious face, Elena realized that sometimes fairy tales come true. Not because magic exists, but because people do. People who see you, people who believe in you, people who offer you a hand when you've been invisible for so long. She thought of her father. She thought of what he would say if he were here right now. And even though she was terrified, even though she had no idea what the future held, Elena opened her mouth and said the only word that mattered. Yes, the months that followed changed Elena's life in ways she never could have imagined. The video continued to spread across the internet, eventually reaching over 50 million views. News stations from around the world picked up her story. The cleaning lady who played Chopin, the hidden prodigy, the woman who waited 20 years for her second chance. Elena did interviews, though she hated them. She was not comfortable in front of cameras, and she never knew what to say when reporters asked how it felt to become famous overnight. She just shrugged and told them the truth. She was not trying to become famous. She just wanted to play piano. But even as the media attention swirled around her, Elena focused on what mattered most. She showed up to class every single day. She practiced for hours, rebuilding the technique that had faded over 2 decades of neglect. She studied music theory with students half her age. She took notes in the same lecture halls she used to mop. It was not easy. There were moments when she felt out of place, when she wondered if she was too old for this, When the gap between her and her classmates felt impossible to bridge, some of the younger students did not know how to act around her. They had seen the video. They knew her story. It made things awkward sometimes, but Elena pushed through. She had already lost 20 years. She was not going to waste another day. Professor Huang became her mentor and her biggest supporter. She pushed Elena harder than any of her other students, demanding perfection, refusing to accept anything less than her best. Sometimes Elena left her lessons exhausted and frustrated, feeling like she would never be good enough. But she always came back the next day, ready to try again. "You have a gift," Professor Huang told her once, after a particularly difficult session. "But gifts mean nothing without discipline. Talent is just the beginning. The rest is work." Elena took those words to heart. She worked harder than she had ever worked in her life. About 3 months after the recital hall incident, something unexpected happened. Elena was practicing alone in one of the small rehearsal rooms when there was a knock on the door. She stopped playing and looked up. It was the young man. The one who had mocked her that day. The one who had dared her to play. He stood in the doorway, looking uncomfortable. His usual confidence was gone. He seemed smaller somehow, like the arrogance had been drained out of him. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. Elena hesitated, then nodded. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. For a long moment, he just stood there, not meeting her eyes. Then he took a deep breath and spoke. "I came to apologize," he said, "for what I did that day. The way I treated you. The things I said." He paused, struggling to find the right words. "It was wrong. I was cruel. And I had no right to be. I judged you based on your job, your uniform, I don't know. I thought I knew who you were. I didn't know anything." Elena watched him carefully. She could see that this was hard for him. Apologizing did not come naturally to someone like him. "I've been thinking about it a lot," he continued. "About why I acted that way. And I think I was scared. Not of you, but of the idea that someone could have that much talent and still end up cleaning floors. Like, if it could happen to you, it could happen to anyone, even me." He shook his head. "I'm just trying to understand myself, I guess." Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she said. He shook his head. "My father got sick. We had no money. I had to choose between my dreams and my family." She looked down at her hands. "I chose my family, and I would make the same choice again, even knowing everything I lost. Because some things matter more than music, more than fame, more than any of this." The young man listened without interrupting. "You mocked me because you thought I was nothing," Elena said. "But I was never nothing. I was a daughter who loved her father. A woman who made sacrifices. A person who kept going even when life was hard." She met his eyes. "The cleaning uniform doesn't define me, and neither does this piano. I define myself." He nodded slowly, his eyes glistening. "I understand, and I'm sorry. I truly am." Elena studied his face for a long moment. She could see that he meant it. The cruelty from that day was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like humility. "I forgive you," she said finally. "But I want you to remember something. The way you treated me, you probably treated others the same way. People who didn't fight back, people who just walked away and felt small for the rest of the day. You might never know how much damage you caused." She paused. "So don't just apologize to me. Be better." "To everyone," he nodded again, this time with more conviction. "I will. I promise." After he left, Elena sat alone in the practice room for a long time, thinking. She had spent so many years feeling invisible, unimportant, forgotten. But now she realized that she had never truly been any of those things. She had just been waiting for the right moment to remember who she was. 1 year later, Elena stood backstage at Carnegie Hall. She could hear the murmur of the audience through the heavy curtain. 2,000 people had come to watch the Westbrook Conservatory's annual showcase of exceptional talent. And this year, For the first time in the school's history, a 53-year-old former janitor was on the program. Elena wore a simple black dress. Her hair was pulled back neatly. Her hands, which had once scrubbed toilets and mopped floors, were now smooth from months of careful care and practice. She looked down at them and smiled. They were still her hands, still the same hands her father used to hold when she was a little girl. Professor Huang appeared beside her. "Are you ready?" Elena took a deep breath. "I think so." "You've earned this," the professor said. "Every moment, every note, remember that." Elena nodded, but there was something else on her mind. Something she had not told anyone about. She peeked through a gap in the curtain and scanned the audience, and then she saw her. An elderly woman sat in the third row, looking around with wide, amazed eyes. She wore a traditional Filipino dress, the kind Elena remembered from her childhood. Her hair was white now, her face lined with age, but her smile was exactly the same. Elena's mother had flown to America for the first time in her life to watch her daughter perform. Tears sprang to Elena's eyes. She had sent the plane ticket herself, saving up for months to make it happen. Her mother had protested at first, saying she was too old for such a long journey. But Elena had insisted, and now here she was, sitting in Carnegie Hall, waiting to hear her daughter play. The stage manager gave her the signal. It was time. Elena walked out onto the stage. The lights were bright, almost blinding. The audience applauded politely as she made her way to the piano. She sat down on the bench and adjusted her position, just as she had done thousands of times before. She looked out at the crowd. She found her mother's face in the third row. The old woman was already crying, her hands clasped together, her lips moving in what Elena knew was a prayer. And next to her mother, in the seat that would have been his, Elena imagined her father. Wearing that borrowed blazer, smiling that proud smile, ready to hear his daughter play one more time. Elena placed her hands on the keys. The hall fell silent, and then she began to play. The music filled Carnegie Hall, rising and falling like breath, like waves, like the beating of a heart. Elena played with everything she had. Every loss, every sacrifice, every moment of invisibility and pain. But also every joy, every hope, every dream that had refused to die, no matter how hard she tried to bury it. When she finished, the silence lasted only a heartbeat. Then the audience rose to their feet, and the applause was like thunder. Elena stood and bowed, tears streaming down her face. She looked at her mother, who was sobbing openly now, clapping her wrinkled hands together with all her strength. And somewhere in her heart, Elena heard another sound beneath the applause. A quiet voice, warm and familiar, saying the words she had waited her whole life to hear. "I'm proud of you, Anak. I always knew you could do it." Elena smiled through her tears. Some dreams don't die. They just wait, patiently, quietly, faithfully. They wait for us to find our way back to them, and when we do, they welcome us home.